Hey everybody. So in this video we're going to be talking a little bit more about RMS effects. Some of the things we're going to talk about here are going to be things I talked about in previous videos. Some may be a bit new, and they're all going to kind of focus on some of the things that may not be super intuitive about RMS effects when you're using them. So we're going to be focusing on this map here. So this map, in case you're wondering, is called Stonehenge, and we happen to see that we have a monument in the middle of the map, which generates gold for us, since I am the one controlling it. So this is just a personal preference of mine, but whenever I have some thing on the map that provides a free resource trickle like this, I don't necessarily want it to be free per se. I like to make it so that players have to invest something or sacrifice something in order to gain a resource trickle like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little something to this middle area here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add these priests around the monument, and they are going to be Gaia objects and unconvertible Gaia objects. So when we add these around the middle, we'll see what happens. So now we can see that we have a bunch of Gaia priests right here in the middle of the map, and as my scout comes up to try and take the monument, we can see what happens is that the neutral priests try and convert my scout, so that makes it rather hard to maintain control of the monument. I am able to get this gold trickle, but we can see that it cost me my scout, which generally speaking is pretty important. So I want to put some other sort of mechanic in the game that players can have an option to go for. So what I'm going to do is I want to be able to create my own priests, which are going to be created at this shrine here. So since the Gaia priests won't be able to convert another priest, that priest that I create at this shrine will be able to get control of the monument without having to sacrifice my scout. So what I'm going to do, if I go up at the top here, I have the priest object constant defined already, and I have the shrine object constant defined already. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put an effect amount will be enable object priest HETR enable value 0. And then I want to make the train location of the priest at the shrine. So if I do another effect amount, set attribute of the priest HETR train location, and I want to put it at the shrine, so the argument is going to be 1712. So now we can see that when I select this shrine, I now have a priest object available to me right now. It costs 100 gold, and that's its default cost. If I go into the units, you notice I didn't have to mess around with changing the train button at all because it's already set to 1, and then its gold cost is 100, which is going to be fine for me also. And so once this priest is trained, we can move it to the middle of the map, and then he's a bit slow. And now we can see that as the player priest approaches, the Gaia priests are not able to convert that, and so I'm able to just walk up to the monument here and maintain control of it without having to sacrifice my scout like I had to do last time. So that's an interesting thing to do, and we were able to achieve this effect using the effect which was enable object, which directly enables an object without any sort of prerequisites. Now, in this case, that can kind of have some negative implications because There's a reason that monks and, for example, and in this instance, our priest is supposed to be a Castle Age unit because it's rather strong to have available in the Dark Age. It doesn't really have any counters. So what we're going to do is that we're going to adjust the stats of the player priest so it's not so strong, and it only really fulfills the purpose which I gave it, which is going to the monument and holding it. So it'll still be able to convert things, but I will reduce its range and correspondingly its line of sight. So in a similar way where I can adjust its train location, I can adjust ATTR max range, set it to 0, and then same with ATTR shown range. And then same thing with line of sight. I'll set it to 4, and I'll set the search radius of it to 4 also. So now we can see that our priest here doesn't have any range. So it'll still be able to convert things, but it would have to go right up to the enemy unit in order to convert. So it's a bit more balanced to have available in the Dark Age. Not super useful, but for the purpose of just going to the monument to control it, it kind of works pretty well. Another thing that this Dark Age priest would be able to do, though, is it can still pick up relics, and it can still bring them back closer to my base, which technically isn't the end of the world, but if there was something I could do to try and prevent that, that would be desirable also. And luckily there is something we can do. So anytime a monk or a priest picks up a relic, it turns into a different unit technically, since it's a priest now, but when it picks up a relic, it's called a priest with a relic. And if we look at the advanced Genie editor, it's actually technically its own unit. So if I were to grab that unit constant, which is 1400, I can change the attributes of that unit also. So if I want the line of sight and search radius to be exactly the same as the priest without a relic, but what I'm really after is setting the ATTR move speed of the priest with relic to 0. And when we set that move speed to 0, we shouldn't be able to bring relics back to our base. So now that our priest is approaching the relic now, we can see it's still able to pick up the relic, but I can't move it anywhere because the priest with relic unit has its movement speed set to 0. I can obviously drop the relic, and the unit turns back into a regular priest, which can move around, but we can't really touch these, or we can't really bring these relics back anymore. So what we've done up to this point is pretty nice, but let's just say that we were playing a game, and all the players in the game tried to make this little priest to try and gain control of the monument. And if we are looking at the monument right now, we can see that it's blue, which means I didn't get there in time. And in this situation, we can see that it doesn't matter how close I get to the monument, I can't get the monument out of the control of the blue player because the priest can't attack or at least convert an enemy priest, at least not without atonement. So I would prefer to at least be able to try to do something about this. So what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to enable atonement for our priests right at the start of the game. So let's go over and take a look at randommap.def for a second. So earlier on, we used an effect that was called enable object, which basically enabled an object which bypassed all the prerequisites. And if we look further down, we can see something fairly similar, which is called enable tech. So maybe we can try to use this and enable atonement. So let's go back to the test script, and the first thing we're going to need is the constant for atonement. So if I go over to text, atonement is 319. So I will go effect amount, enable tech. I want to enable atonement, and I will go HETR enable argument 0, and at the same time I want to make it able to be researched at this shrine instead of where it's normally researched, which is at the monastery. So I will say another effect amount, which is going to be modify tech. Going to modify the atonement technology in HETR set location. It's going to be at the shrine. So let's restart. So we are in the game here, and we have our shrine selected. We can notice that the atonement tech is not available to us right now. If we take a look back at randommap.def, you'll notice that some of these effects have the value specified where it would otherwise be unclear. So for example, enable object told us that the value was supposed to be 0, whereas if we were, for example, using a disable tech, the value would instead be tech ID. Now you'll notice that enable tech is really unspecified for the value, so we could try either setting the value to 0 or setting the value to the tech ID, which is 319, but what I've noticed that setting it to either one doesn't really seem to do anything. So as far as I can tell, this whole effect, enable tech, doesn't really do anything in the context of RMS. But luckily, there is a way that we can get around that, which I will explain. So instead of trying to enable the technology, let's try and look at what that technology is actually doing. So if we're looking at the Advanced Genie Editor, we can see atonement is having the effect of 319. And if we go over to the Effects tab and look for 319, we see what it does is it just sets resource 27, and it sets it to 1. So instead of trying to enable the tech, let's try and do something else. Let's just try and say atonement is resource 27. And instead of an enable tech, we will say mod resource. We will mod the resource atonement, HETR set, and we'll just set it to 1. So instead of trying to enable the tech, we're just trying to achieve whatever effect that tech is supposed to be having. So let's restart and we'll see what we can do. So now we're back in the game, and we can immediately see that atonement looks like it's working now, because all of the Gaia priests are now converting the player priests, which is kind of defeating the purpose of having the player priest to begin with, because the whole point of that was to allow players to approach the monument without being converted. I guess the point I'm trying to make is that when we applied this effect that said mod resource, we did it for all players, but all players includes Gaia. So if we want to remove atonement for only Gaia, after we set everyone's atonement resource to 1, we can do another effect that says Gaia mod resource and set Gaia's atonement resource back to 0. So now we're back here, and we can see that the Gaia priests are no longer able to convert the player priests, but since the player's atonement resource is still set to 1, I can now task my priest to an enemy priest to try and take the monument back. Not necessarily going to win because it's pretty RNG based, but at least I can try to do something. So let's just take a few steps back and think about what we've just gone through. So I just got finished saying that any effect that we apply to all players, for example the atonement resource, will apply to Gaia as well. So we saw that with the atonement resource that we set, but also notice that up at the top here, we set attributes for priests also. For example, setting their range to 0. And if we take a look at the game, we can see that if we select a player priest, that indeed has a range of 0. But if we take a look at a Gaia priest, the Gaia priest still has a range of 9. So why is this? Well, this kind of has to do with a little bug that's currently in the game, and it has to do with this command up at the top, which is set Gaia civilization. So when you use this command set Gaia civilization in a map, it can sometimes have the unintended effect of nullifying certain effects to be applied to Gaia units. So let me comment this out and I'll try to explain it a bit better. Okay, so the reason we had that set Gaia civilization command in our map was to change the graphics of the monument in the middle. And when we remove that, we can see that the Gaia priests now have a range of 0, so these effects that we were applying to the priests for all players include Gaia also. And this is what I would call intentional behavior, because when we change it back to include this set Gaia civilization command, things can get a little bit weird. So let's restart. And now we already saw that those RMS effects that we applied to priests won't work if we have this set Gaia civilization command in our map. But this bug that we're talking about here, when we set Gaia civilization, it doesn't prevent effects from being applied to all units. It only prevents effects from being applied to certain classes of units. And I'll try to give some examples to try and be a bit more clear. So if we were to try and divide units into 2 different types of classes, there are units that players can control, and there are units that only Gaia can control. So if we take a look around at our map, we can see things like villagers, scouts, town centers, and this shrine here are all kinds of objects that players can control. But objects like forge bushes, trees, gold mines, this boar here, those are all examples of objects that only Gaia can control. And this is going to be an important distinction into seeing what kinds of objects will be able to have effects applied to them and which objects will not. So let's try and take an example here. So if we do effect amount Gaia set attribute, we'll set the attribute of a monument, let's say the monument in the middle, to have less HP than it does now. We'll set it from 9,999 just to 1,000. HTTR hit points 1,000. And let's restart and see if that worked. And we can see that the monument still has 9,999 HP because a monument is a type of unit that a player is able to control. And let's try and contrast this with, say, a gold mine, a unit that a player is not able to control, let's try and apply an effect to that. So in a similar way, we will set the attribute of gold ATTR storage value, and we'll set it to 10,000. And we can see that since this is a Gaia-only object, we're able to apply that particular effect to it, increasing its storage value when we are setting Gaia's civilization. So I hope that makes it a bit more clear to put this kind of bug in context to give you an idea of what kinds of units you'll be able to apply effects to and what units you won't be able to apply effects to if you happen to be using set Gaia's civilization in your map. And just to be clear, that is only the case if you set Gaia's civilization. So if we were to remove that, now the effect that we tried to apply to the monument, reducing its HP, is now working. So I hope that gives a bit more clarity on this issue. And in our particular case, it should properly explain why this atonement resource was able to be applied to both players and Gaia, because we're not modifying a player controllable unit per se, we're just modifying a resource, but we were not able to apply any effects to the Gaia priests because these priests are indeed units that players are able to control also. Now for the next part of this video, I want to talk a little bit about disabling things, because the way you disable things with RMS effects can sometimes depend on what exactly you're disabling. So let's just say I want to disable palisade walls. So I can try to look in randommap.def and I can try to use the, well, there's no such thing as a disable object command, but we can use the attr disable type to try and achieve that. So if we will enable object palisade attr disable argument 0. Let's see what happens. We can see that we are no longer able to build palisade walls. So that was able to be disabled successfully. And now let's try something else. Let's try the same thing, but instead of a palisade wall, we will disable a farm. So we can see that we're not able to build farms right now, but if we were going to build a mill, which usually enables farms, we can see that we can place farms now. So basically how you disable something depends on when it is available. So things that don't have any prerequisites, such as palisade walls, can be just disabled straight out with that enable object effect. But things that have prerequisites that are enabled later on in the game need a slightly different approach. So if we go to the Advanced Genie editor, we can see that there is a technology that enables farms that requires a mill to be built. So to disable farms, we will farm tech, which is 216. And instead of enable object, we will say disable tech. So disable tech has the type of attr disable, which we have, and the value is the tech ID. So that is 216. And instead of disabling the farms themselves, we will instead disable the farm enabling tech. So let's restart. And the first thing we'll do is we'll build a mill. We can see that even after we've built a mill, that farms are no longer available to us because we disabled that enabling tech. Now, the two examples I just showed with palisade walls and farms, if we're just trying to disable generic units or buildings, usually the easiest way to do that is just to change the train location to somewhere other than a builder or other than whichever building it's being trained from. But this kind of methodology can kind of help us out in other situations because in addition to disabling certain units or buildings, we can also have an effect on certain civ bonuses. We can disable them to an extent. So let's take hunters, for example. So a normal hunter would have a work rate of 0.41, which controls how fast they collect food from a huntable. And this work rate of 0.41 would be true for all civilizations except for the Mongols. So the Mongols have a hunting bonus where they collect food 40% faster. So if we were to sort our technologies based on civilization, we can see that this bonus for Mongols, which makes their hunters work faster, is actually technology. So if we were to try and disable that technology, we could maybe think we could disable that civ bonus also. So if I change farm tech to Mongol hunt, and that is 389. Disable tech, Mongol hunt, 389. So if we disable the tech 389, which is enabling the Mongol hunters to work faster, first we'll go into this demonstration of how fast Mongol hunters are normally supposed to be working. So we can see that the food is going up relatively quickly, and then we'll restart the game with that effect, and we'll see if there's any change. And as far as I can see, the food is going up basically at the same rate as it was the last time we tried it. So it doesn't look like this effective disabling the Mongol hunt technology is actually having an effect. But we really shouldn't expect it to, because if we take a look, is that this civ bonus has no prerequisites whatsoever. So there's no real point in disabling the tech if it's already been researched as soon as the game starts. So in this case, what we would have to do instead is just basically override the effect of that technology, which has already been researched. So instead of needing the technology constant, I'm going to say hunter 1 is going to be 122. And hunter 2 is going to be 216. So instead of affecting the technology, what I'm going to do is effect percent hunter 1 ATTR work rate, and the, well, it's actually setting attribute of hunter 1. The work rate is going to be setting it to 0.41, and same with hunter 2. I'm going to set it to 0.41 also. The effect percent just effectively moves the decimal over 2 places to make it 0.41 instead of 41. So if we do that, we can see that the food is going up at a noticeably slower rate than it was the last time we tried it. So we've effectively disabled the Mongol hunting bonus using this effect %. So what we just looked at was disabling a civ bonus that's supposed to be present from the start of the game. But if we want to disable a bonus that isn't present from the start of the game, we would have to take a slightly different approach. So let's take Vikings, for example. So the Vikings have a bonus that upon reaching the feudal age, their infantry units get an extra 10% HP. And if we look at that tech, which is 416, obviously that would require the Viking player to be in the feudal age. So this does have prerequisites. So if we want to disable this, we would have to take the route of disabling this particular tech. So let's say infantry HP is 416, and the effect we're going to use is effect amount disable tech infantry HP AGTR disable, and the value is 416. And now we will start as the Vikings, and we will also start the game in the feudal age. So we can see that it doesn't really matter that we started the game in the feudal age after that particular tech was already supposed to be researched. It will still work as long as that tech has some prerequisites and isn't just enabled from the start of the game. And on the subject of Vikings, let's say that in addition to disabling their infantry HP, we also wanted to disable free wheelbarrow. So this technology is called free wheelbarrow. It has the effect 391, and if we take a look at 391, we can see that that effect is absolutely nothing. And that's because the Viking bonus of free wheelbarrow is embedded into their tech tree, so it's not its independent tech. And this kind of brings to light some of the limitations to modifying civ bonuses with RMS effects, is that any effects that are embedded into tech trees or team bonuses, those cannot be overridden with any RMS effects. We can demonstrate that really quick. So wheelbarrow is technology 213. If I try to modify that technology to change its food cost, let's see what happens. We can see that the wheelbarrow is still free for the Vikings, and that would also go for their team bonus also, which makes docks cheaper, so it costs now 128 wood. And if we were to say set it back to 150, which is what a dock should normally cost, we can see that it still costs 128. So tech trees and team bonuses cannot be overridden with RMS effects. So that's one of those limitations. So with that, I think that's about all I wanted to cover in this video. So hopefully now you have a few more tidbits of information regarding some of those things which are not super intuitive about RMS effects. So thanks everybody for watching, and I'll see you next time.